Hello, I'm Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmadge, we offer these short Bible studies on our lectionary readings. This week, we find ourselves in the Old Testament in Exodus chapter 32, verses 7 through 14. Some of the commentary this week will be by Rolf Jacobson of his 2010 commentary from Working Preacher. Let's go ahead and get started. I hope your Bibles are open and ready, and let's start with Exodus 7 through 14. Before we jump into Exodus 7 through 14, though, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background. Moses is at the top of Mount Sinai with God, and he has been up there for a while, and the Israelites, begin to panic because they haven't seen him, and they don't know how much longer he'll be up there. And for all they know, he may never be coming back. And so they are panicked, they are fearful, and they do some things that aren't exactly pleasing to God. But that so often happens when we lose trust or we become fearful. So let's take a look at Exodus 32, 7 through 14. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord said to Moses, "I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and of you I will make a great nation." But Moses implored the Lord and his God, and said, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth'? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, 'I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.' And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he had planned to bring on his people." So there's a couple ways that we can look at this passage. One is the first way it can be understood as a narrative on a commentary of the first commandment. You shall have no other gods. You shall not make yourself an idol. Or we can understand this narrative commentary on the fickleness of human nature. We are the kind of creatures who do exactly what we are told not to do. And this could also be about the faithfulness of God. The Lord is the kind of creator who keeps his promises. In his commentary, Dr. Jacobson highlights 4 scenes from this text. And as the story unfolds, there's a repetitive phrase here, maybe you caught it, "who brought us up out of the land of Egypt." This recurs 5 times. We see that the story is set just after the exodus from Egypt and the gift of the covenant. The recently emancipated people have been gathered by God at Mount Sinai. There, they were claimed by God and received the 2 tablets of the covenant, which God gave to Moses. In this first scene, it focuses on the people in the absence of their leader. Moses was sequestered with God in an extended executive session. He was gone a long time, and the people grew afraid. So when they saw that he was delayed, they decided to gather around Aaron and say to him, "Come, make gods for us. Who shall go before us? As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." I think this last phrase is especially worth noting, because like most heresies, it is half true. Do the people get it right? Did Moses bring the people out of Egypt? Well, on a human level, he did. Moses was the human God used to bring the people out of Egypt. But on a deeper theological level, the people do not get it right. God brought the people out of Egypt. As the first commandment says, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." So what happens when we lose sight of God? Losing sight of God can look like many things. Sometimes that's the loss of a spiritual mentor or a pastor who had a huge impact, or a teacher or a friend or or anyone that you were close to spiritually that helped draw that out of you and helped you grow. And it can be a real season of lostness when you lose that key person in your life that has been that for you. And the Israelites, having lost sight of God, in turn lost their direction. The people longed for a visible image of God to lead them. Come, they said, make a God for us who shall go before us. In the second scene, it focuses on Aaron. Aaron gathers the collective costume jewelry from the people and melts them down and makes a golden calf. He said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." So what is Aaron's sin? Traditionally, most interpretations of the story accuse Aaron of making an image of a false god. But that is not really where Aaron went wrong. As indicated by Aaron's proclamation in verse 5, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord. Aaron's mistake was to make a false image of the true God. As we look, this is kind of similar to scene 1. Aaron gets it right and mostly wrong. Aaron knows that Moses did not lead the people out of Israel. The Lord did. And thus he proclaims a festival to the Lord. But in order to give the people something to follow, Aaron makes a false image of the true God, which God had forbidden in Exodus 20. So this kind of brings a great point to kind of stop and pause and ask ourselves the question, what are our idols? Our idols come from all different kinds of things. And I think it's easy for us to think that, well, we really don't have any idols because they don't come in these nice little metal idols that we like to hang on our walls or anything like that. But it's amazing how many things and how quickly things can become our idols. And oftentimes we can find ourselves subscribing to certain people rather than to God, rather than turning to the Word or listening to other things about God. So our idols also come, though, in our own churches, from past pastors who we might miss and think that if they were still there, then we would be so much better off, to doctrines. In our church, we can place idolatry on that and make that is the only thing that faith is about. And to our traditions, we can hold on to those and feel like that can become an idol. The old liturgy can become an idol. And there are many other things that we hold on to, even within our faith, instead of God. In scene 3, we switch to the mountaintop, where the Lord is consulting with Moses. He turns to Moses and says, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.'" The Lord cites how the people have confused the visible, finite, earthly image with the invisible, infinite, heavenly God. As I listen to the Israelites cry, I think it's so easy for us to understand how badly they needed or wanted a visible God, and yet how elusive an invisible God is, and yet how powerful an invisible God is. We also see that God has become a little disillusioned with his people. And then the Lord does the unthinkable. He offers to scrap Abraham's descendants and start over with Moses and his descendants. Now let me burn, now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And of you I will make a great nation. Well, we need to go back to Genesis 12 and remember that God had promised a great nation to Abraham's descendants. And there were many in number, but they certainly were not great in the spiritual sense. So by saying, "Of you I will make a great nation," the Lord was offering to make Moses the new Abraham and to start over. But in the fourth and final scene, Moses is finally the one in this story to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. He reminds God of his promises to Isaac and Israel and how God swore to them. That is, Moses made aware that the Lord had offered him the tempting chance to be a new Abraham, Moses throws the promise to Abraham back in God in bold act of intercessory prayer. You promised Abraham, you promised Isaac, you promised Israel, by your own name you promised. And the good book says the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. So as we look to this, we can see the faithfulness of God. And maybe even ask ourselves, what kind of God do we have? We have a God that keeps his promises and is faithful. And sometimes keeping those promises means God has to forgive rather serious sins. But that is the nature of the one who has claimed us. God is faithful and God keeps promises. So let's take a look at a few questions. And there's a lot of questions within this text that kind of just come about. One of the questions I'd like you to think about is, do you believe that we are all that different from those people, from the Israelites who traversed this earth over 3,000 years ago? Especially when we stop and think about the first commandment, thou shalt not have no other gods before me. Are we really all that different than the first century believers? We might not have little metal idols that we can go out and buy, but if there's plenty of opportunity to go and do that too. But we find ourselves with lots of other idols. Do you believe that we can change God's mind? And I think that that's a really interesting question. As we see Moses presenting an argument to God, changing his mind that, God, don't start over again. And I like the point that he also makes about the Egyptians, right? So people are going to laugh at this God who brings his people and frees them and does this mighty act and then goes off and kills all of them? Really, God? Is that how you want people to know you by? I also appreciate hearing of God's frustration. And one of my images of the book of Exodus is stiff-necked people. And as a kid, I just could see people in neck braces thinking that they were literally stiff-necked. But this reading today also brings out how easily we are distracted and how easily we forget and how easily we want to move on to this new thing, thinking that that is God. And oftentimes, God doesn't work that way. So I hope this week you have some time to ponder these questions, and blessings to you in your journey.